House
talking about
Warmington.
the Republican Party in Clark County and Greene
Yeah.
County.
He had nothing to do with politics.
It was his brother, Frank
Oh, yes, his brother.
Warmington.
That was,
We rented the house to him.
well, it was his brother. With Bud Brown.
What house is this?
Bud Brown's,
What
He's his
house?
secretary.
at Whitehall.
That what? Oh, you mean the
There
gatehouse?
was a house over at.
Oh, another
across
house, not the
yard
gatehouse.
Where the, no, not the gatehouse.
They had a number of houses at Whitehall.
This was the superintendent's house, which was just
No,
across
this,
the.
this house they rented was a garage apartment.
Over the garage, I know that.
That's
I rented that one.
Frank Warmington's brother rented the garage apartment.
He was an awfully nice fellow, and I liked
Well, Frank Warmington is the chairman of the
He was
Republican Party.
nothing like the other, his brother.
And Frank is married to a very handsome gal who's my buddy
Oh, yeah.
on this historical project.
Oh, she's a darling.
A beautiful gal.
Oh,
And
a very
What's
woman
that
and an
noise?
odd child.
Is there a noise?
your housekeeper's
May?
putting ice in
glass.
the glasses preparatory to dinner, and we will tape recorder, we will go to dinner soon. At any rate, they are both ironclad Republicans, and would like to talk with you later about the Republican Party in Clark County, and then also in Greene County, of course, because it spilled over, and the early days in Whitehall. And they are also looking for a paper that you wrote some years ago, and they don't know where it is, about the Republican Party in Clark and Greene County.
Well, they get their fired in Dallas pretty soon.
I think so. Or maybe so. Good place to start to look.
Of course, my memory's so poor that I don't remember much except when I was chairwoman. And
I think your memory's
You
Very
know,
good.
you know, Ohio, we're the 7th district.
Uh-huh.
Now, you understand
Yeah,
that?
we're seventh
Yeah.
district.
All right, the 7th district comes down and picks up the north part of Yellow Springs. Most of Yellow Springs is in Greene County,
That's right.
not in Clark.
Not in Clark.
But Martha had a couple of county, what do you call
Chairman?
it, get-togethers.
Sure. Oh,
Huh?
yeah.
Yeah. And they were I've lost my story.
Yeah, county get-togethers.
County get-together, yeah.
Yeah.
She had them there at
Yeah,
Whitehall.
oh, yeah. We read about those. We never
Yeah.
went to one, but we read about them.
And you had one of the Tafts from Cincinnati.
Yeah.
You had, oh my God, our friend from Toledo, who was running for
DeSalle?
governor.
DeSalle? No, he was Democrat.
Hmm.
You couldn't have him.
Toledo, who was running for governor?
Toledo,
We're
the
talking
man
about-
who was running for governor.
And lost?
we were talking
Yeah,
about
lost it.
Charlie Bolton was running for Congress. And I had a big do for him. And they told me that Mrs. Bolton would speak.
Oh, yes.
I was
Bolton?
That's
Mrs.
Cleveland. Cleveland, the Bolton family.
Yeah, okay.
She was in office for 30 years.
Yeah.
Sure. She was.
Everybody loved
Do
her.
you know
That's
that
all
there's
she
an
did.
airstrip
That's
in
what
Columbus named after her?
So they told me that
Field?
she would be
On the west side of
speaker.
Columbus. yeah.
And everybody got excited. They were so pleased. So I placed this great big armchair at the corner of the big room, you know. We could make it
A
a big
large
room.
salon.
Yes. And everybody came.
Well, Marty, is
All
Springfield
the
still
same.
in the 7th district?
And
Sounds
in
good.
walked this young girl
Yes.
that had just graduated from Vassar and said, "This is Mrs. Bolton." I thought, okay.
Oh, really? The same?
And they
Mrs.
put her
Bolton?
in a chair, and I had nothing to do but introduce everybody that could, all the Congress, the state representatives, and the mayor,
Where's
and the
my-
sheriff, and so.
Thank you.
Hi.
Whatever y'all feel like it, just let me know.
All right, we're just about ready. As soon as Martha finishes her story.
Well, I'm almost through.
We're coming, man.
And then I introduced her, of course, And she got up,
Look,
very nice looking. I looked about 19.
really?
And she had a little piece of paper about this big.
About 2
And
inches
so
by
I sat
3
back
inches.
waiting for a typical political speech, you see. And I looked again, I couldn't see anything. No.
Complete silence in the
I
room?
looked over the chair.
And this is a little
She
bitty
was
lady.
still there, but she wasn't talking.
Oh,
And she was finished.
and she's all through?
Yes, and
Oh dear.
I was really on the spot. So I find myself practically dabbling, and then I called on this wonderful woman from Zeta who had been there. She knew I was in trouble. So she got up and she talked about something that was relevant to the county. And we didn't take everybody there. So it wasn't noticed. But I had the hell of a nerve to pull that on me.
Go in and identify the pictures that we see in
Wouldn't that be fun?
that room, because I don't know who I'm looking at, and I think I know, but I'm not sure.
There are pictures
I
in
would
your
just
study,
like to know,
Martha.
it has nothing to do with history or anything else. I just like to know who are these guys.
Tomorrow morning, we're going to look at things. Martha wants to
There we
talk
go.
about politics, starting with Whitehall as early as she can remember it, and she was, ooh, watch that coffee. And she was there in 1902, were you, Martha? Yes,
Got
oh
it.
boy, let's be careful. We're serving
This is
a
yours,
No,
demitasse.
it's hers, Miss Rankin's.
No, I
And
don't
the-
want
No,
anything.
it's
No.
Mary's.
Okay, we'll leave
Okay.
it over here.
Thank you.
Thank you. We're serving a
I-
demitasse, a beautiful
The first
gold
thing
rimmed
I
cup.
remember about politics at all was my father and mother and going to the polls.
Mhm.
And of course I was too young to vote.
Where did you vote, Martha? Were you in Yellow Springs or Springfield?
Yellow Springs.
Mm-hmm.
And of course there was no registration. And when I took over as chairman, there was no registration.
Does
And
everybody?
I had to.
What do you mean, no registration?
What?
You're saying no registration?
To vote, you didn't have to register to vote.
People
But you
came
didn't-
up and
You
said,
didn't have to then?
No.
You
Said
just
my
walked
name.
in and voted?
well, everybody knew everybody, I suppose.
That was it, and especially we had tight fights. It's just we had the first time I was chairman, and I called. First in one precinct, I only had one woman,
Yeah. Poll watcher, one woman.
and I said, "You get some of your friends, and you go for so many hours."
You're gonna see to it that
I
people.
really think, and the minute they saw closing time was approaching, and Mary Jones had not appeared.
Uh-huh.
Of course, they all knew where they all were to vote. You couldn't just vote any place. I mean, they had their old precincts. Somebody dashed across the street with a cell phone. Yes, she's on her way. So it showed that they were beginning to take an interest.
What, do you have any guess what time of the, what year that might be?
Did I?
Do you have an idea what year that might be? Would that be 1915 or 1918?
Well, let's see.
You were a young woman then. If you were born in 1896.
I always try to think about who I was married to.
Good question.
I keep track that way.
That's a good idea.
No, I think that's what was way back in the 30s.
Well, I believe it.
Yes.
You would have been maybe 35, 36, somewhere in there.
Yeah. I was married when I was 28
To,
to Bill Bealey
Bealey.
in 34.
hey,
So it must have been before 34.
all right.
Well, anyway.
So you watched the polls and you kept track of who was voting and
Well,
who didn't
we had
vote.
that was pretty well organized. There was certain women that took books from certain. They took all the votes and drove down to Xenia.
Mm-hmm.
So you did not know anything until the next morning
When they counted the votes.
at 8 o'clock, no doubt.
Uh-huh.
and then they had to be counted twice.
Did the Democrats count them too?
Oh, heavens, yes.
Of course.
But we didn't pay much attention to that.
The Democrats, no. Okay.
And I remember when, what was his name? John W. Davis was running for president, and I thought he was so attractive. And he was going to speak in Columbus. Now, that was one of my first interests, was being stirred by. And I can't remember who I went over with. Of course, she was a Democrat, and I told Mother, and I thought she was going to hit the ceiling.
Oh? Because he was an attractive man, and then
She said, Martha, come in there. Don't tell your father that you went. Well, I said, this man is extremely intelligent, and he is a very good speaker. John over the Democrat is running for president.
Davies, a Democratic contestant for president. We'll have to figure out
A
who that
long
was.
time ago. I forgot who was running
Anyway,
against.
her mother was horrified
I
that she
bet he
would
was
go.
running against Teddy Roosevelt. I'm not sure.
Could be.
Far back as that. Oh, my father thought Teddy was something.
He liked
I can remember the Spanish-American War, really. Although I didn't take much back.
Well, that was a good war to fight in because not too many people got hurt.
Indeed, they didn't.
Some did.
That's when we missed it. We should have grabbed that island just like kept it.
Yeah. That was stupid, really stupid.
Absolutely.
We've had trouble ever since.
And of all people, Teddy Roosevelt, who was a fighter from the beginning.
Big father.
Backed off. didn't
And
he?
General Wood, he was quite a good soldier. He was head of the army.
Well, Roosevelt was not in a position at that time, though, to do anything about it. He was just what was he, colonel in the Rough Riders or something? He didn't have any political power at that point.
Well, I thought he was president of the United States.
Hell no.
No.
He was riding with the Rough Riders,
That's true.
and he didn't have any political
That's
power.
why
at that
one of the
point.
reasons he had
Well,
His political power was partially built on his performance in the Spanish-American War, but he had nothing that he could possibly
Well,
contribute at
President
that time.
was Lincoln, Garfield died,
Yeah.
and he bounced into
Mhm.
power. No, I was thinking that you're right. They were both galloping their horses.
Yeah. No, that's the big image that he developed. Teddy Roosevelt, the Rough Rider.
Charming.
Yes.
But that's what led to the presidency. But he had no
Yes, sir.
power at
Oh,
that
yeah.
point.
And I don't
And
suppose,
after that was all over, it was too
I
late.
don't think Garfield gave a damn about. I don't think he knew where Cuba was.
He may not. A lot of people didn't know where Cuba was.
I don't think so.
Well, we had a great interest in Cuba at that point. Okay, now we're back to where you were perhaps Republican committee chairman or Republican poll
No, I
watcher.
wasn't anything at the time.
Okay.
I was just a worker. And
A worker.
when the chairman found I had an interest and had plenty of time
Mhm.
and a little money to spend,
That's a good idea.
he thought maybe I might be a good subject. So at the end of that election, this is Lowell Fest.
Hmm?
He was chairman at that time.
I know the old fest.
He called me up. He
Wow.
said, "Now, Martha, I'm going to make a lot of enemies." But he always hesitated when he talked.
Yes.
Humps and hugs. But I want you to be chairwoman of Greene County. And I said, thank you very much. That's very nice. I think I'm capable. So I saw a lot of Lowell, reckless over. And he was no good.
You're right. You're absolutely right.
Well, he wasn't too effective, isn't that what you
Not
No,
very
and
bright.
it was just too bad. His father was a nice old goat.
true. But
I
Lowell,
shouldn't call him a goat because
well, he was all right. He was a
he had a
decent
good
gentleman.
He was a good friend of my father's. And then he was president of Antioch for a while, I think.
One of them was president of Antioch, like Simeon D. or something.
Oh, yeah.
That's the one.
I never knew that. When was that? Must have been, what, 1920, something like that?
Oh gosh, 1910.
Sometime back there.
Wow.
Well, anyway, as long as you lived in Whitehall, you must have been heavily involved in Republican politics because of your father and mother.
Well, there weren't any Democrats.
Excuse me.
That's right. There was
And,
one party
if we knew what we didn't recognize them. And the same way with the
One party
Catholics
system.
and the,
Yeah, one party
they were
system.
all very straight.
Everybody was
And
Republican.
the Irish, they were up in line at the time.
Were the Irish Democrats?
Oh no, they weren't anything. They were just maids.
May I give you this?
Yes, ma'am.
Martha, I was told. Hold on, but
May,
Take
you want
it
this
first.
too?
we're clearing off the coffee cups here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so the Republicans were in power, and you didn't recognize any Democrats. Then why were elections important? Were the primaries important so that you could elect which Republicans you wished?
That I can't remember because the primaries came, of course the national primaries have been in effect for some time.
Mm-hmm.
But well, the
primaries had to be the
yeah,
important ones.
Yes,
Okay.
but they don't now make an impression on me. Because as I say, we were all Republicans.
So you got along well, and then
We got along very well.
along very well.
And the farmers were so cute. They just loved it.
Did the Republicans help the farmers particularly?
No. They got along very nicely, but they avoided the politics was not a popular subject,
I see. So you just
and it wasn't important to them.
to the farmers. No, it would not be till much later. Not be till Franklin Roosevelt's time.
Yes. Well, I always had a different feeling about every president during my time because I felt there was a good in all of them. I never cared much for Nixon
Good thinking.
because I remember going on the train with him. That was part of our jobs. We got on the train in Springfield and get off in Dayton. You know.
Uh-huh.
Shake hands with the captain.
Shake hands.
Say, how do you do? And I remember he was in his seating aisle, and I said something to him. And he said, that's a very important question. And otherwise they wouldn't get I don't know what it was.
Were there any other
What was the question, huh?
Yeah, what was the question?
Yeah.
Were there any other Republican presidents that you knew personally, or that you had shaken hands with, perhaps?
Oh, yes, Goldwater.
Goldwater.
But there's a poor campaigner.
You're right.
He was
And
a
what
lousy
about-
campaigner, but he could have been a damn good president.
Wonderful.
Yeah,
He could have
Right.
been one of our very best.
absolutely.
He could have.
Yeah,
I agree with you.
And, I just loved him. And he seemed to enjoy the campaign. I remember being on the train, and he enjoyed seeing people, but he didn't have that oomph.
Mhm.
How about Coolidge? Did you know Calvin Coolidge?
Well, I didn't care much for him.
I love
How about
the great
Hoover?
story. I love the great story about Calvin Coolidge, which I think epitomizes his presidency. And you know, that wasn't such a bad presidency in many ways.
No, it
because
wasn't.
was pretty stable. But the story that I've always loved is Calvin Coolidge arriving at the dedication of some major building, and he is to put out the first shovel of dirt for establishing the foundation. And so he puts the shovel in, turns it up, and doesn't say anything. And one of his aides whispers in his ear, President Coolidge, you really have to say something. And so Coolidge looks down at the ground and says, in his New England accent, well, that's a mighty fine earthworm.
Probably
I
was.
never heard that.
That's about it. Well, he never put his foot
I
in his
never
mouth.
heard that. I always heard the story about somebody had an appointment with him, and they walked into his office. And after casual greetings, the man said, Mr. President, I'm so impressed with your desk. It's always so neat and tidy. And he said, I never change the subject. I thought really spoke volumes.
Very good. He
when,
didn't
when,
indeed.
when the thing was done, it was done, and he wasn't going to fool with that piece of literature anymore.
Oh, dear. Okay, then it was Coolidge Hoover. Did you know Hoover? Did you know President Hoover?
Herbert?
Herbert?
No, I didn't know him.
Okay, and then Roosevelt. Did you have any contact with him at all?
Franklin D.
Franklin D.
No, we moved back from Switzerland at the time.
You were married to a diplomat at that time.
Yes,
And you were at
What
Switzerland.
was this guy?
and I had all. He was a Democrat.
Cable?
Yes,
Well, a
What
Democrat,
was he?
Martha.
and his father was a congressman.
Oh.
And I had high hopes that I would be dressed in a long black velvet dress, receiving all the dignitaries and all that bull. You know, I wanted something to do. The children were very little.
You're a busy lady and had a lot of energy.
Had a lot of energy, and so I kept egging him on. And his friend,
Martha, you know, I'm a little reluctant to interject all of this, but your kids were all Veely's kids, weren't they?
yeah,
Yeah. You had any kids with Cable or
no,
no?
When did you marry Cable?
in the
So your life was
90
fascinating us for
96.
years.
96, I think it
1896.
Oh no.
Couldn't be. No
No,
way.
no. Come on.
No way.
is. 1996, 1936.
36. That's better.
That makes sense. Yeah. You married Bud in 42, I know. Okay.
And then Bud and I were married 42 years.
No. But Cable was a State Department man.
Yes.
How the hell did you meet him?
He was a career, he was extremely intelligent man. His father was a congressman, and he was very familiar with Washington.
But where did you meet him?
What?
Where did you meet him?
I met him in Rock Island, Illinois.
In Moline?
Moline.
Moline.
His mother was very much going down there, and her father was his busted in the capital. I forgot what he was. So of course she was alive in that atmosphere, and she was quite the going down. And she just took one look at me, and her nose went way up in the air. She didn't approve me at all. So I studied over that for a while because I couldn't imagine not being liked. I was always liked whether they showed it or not, you know.
Of course.
But she didn't want Phil to get married. But it was a wonderful life over there. It really was exciting.
In Switzerland.
All nationalities.
Mm-hmm.
Grand Hotel was filled with people that were left over from the war,
Yes,
all
This
nationalities.
is with this guy Cable?
the cable.
Yeah.
As an
No?
American diplomat.
What was he? He was,
He was doing nothing then. He resigned.
Well, he was an American diplomat at the time, was he?
Yeah.
And you enjoyed that.
He enjoyed it very much. He was difficult, I'm told.
You don't have to say any more about anything than you want to,
And then
or I will turn off the tape recorder.
Nicola Balklov, his slave. I always said that he did everything that put him on the job.
Who was the slave, Martha?
He was a slave. He was dressing,
Oh,
and I could see him
it's
yet
valet.
with his silver cigarette case held out, open, ready for Phil to take it. More his cigarette.
Great.
wow.
That's pretty classy.
Sure.
So that didn't last too long, I take it.
Well, I don't know. He was difficult. His sister was a bitch. They tried their best to look me out of everything,
Oh, I'm glad you, I'm glad
but
you
I
removed
didn't let
yourself.
him do it.
But you had two little daughters at the same time.
Well, you see, fortunately, I had those by the Beatles.
Yeah. Or that would have been trouble.
And they were, yes, and I had loads of friends at the Mobley, and I just loved it.
Sounds pretty glamorous. Except for your husband, who sounded extremely difficult.
But Switzerland was exciting.
No.
And going, Nicholas would drive us, and we'd go to all the embassies
Mm-hmm.
where he had been. He wasn't particularly popular, but it was fun to go
Yeah,
and
the ends.
look and see. He had a good mind.
You've had a hell of an exciting life, Martha.
What?
You've had a hell of an exciting life.
Yes, it was.
Really?
It
Very few people have had a life like yours.
it's been quite exciting.
Well, one more thing before we run out of tape. We have not yet backed up enough to hear your stories of your ambulance driving
Yeah, I'd
in
love to hear these.
that's empty.
No,
In France.
I was over
So tell us a little more about that, can you?
overseas with Ann Morgan.
Ann Morgan, that's the lady, of course.
Yeah.
She organized the American Ambulance Brigade, was it?
Corps.
Corps?
Yes.
And they were all volunteer American drivers, all women, all gutsy.
Well, I know there were loads of French, and there were quite a few British
French, British, and American then.
and American, and they stationed us in Soissons,
Okay.
which was had been bombed. We were put in an old chateau with bombed to hell, and no heat in it, and it was bad. It was.
Dreadful.
It really was tough living,
Mm-hmm.
and we had open fireplaces, and we had to take care of our own cars.
Oh, you did?
I'll find that car by sometime.
These are ambulances you're talking about.
No, it was not. No,
No?
it was just a car.
Were you a courier?
Well, I was in charge of the school children because I spoke French,
Yeah.
and
In
my duty
Soissons.
was to go every day and interview the teacher and take them out and teach them games. It sounds
Yeah, that sounds strange, doesn't it?
asinine.
Crazy in the middle of a war.
No, the armistice had been signed at
Oh.
that time. I was over after the war.
Aha. Okay.
During the war, I was quarantined at Will Wright field,
Yeah, right.
and that was during
Okay.
the
Yeah.
flu.
Oh, you were a nurse then.
Yes.
How did you get
I-
nursing training?
Well, I was studied at the Walter Reed Hospital in Washington. I took a regular nurse's course there,
Did you really?
and then from there, I was ready to go overseas, and the armistice was signed.
Uh-huh.
So then I came back and then joined the groups that went to volunteer for the flu.
Yeah.
That was one hell of a thing.
It truly
And
was.
they should see it. I tell you, there were
Awful.
12 nurses and 500 patients.
Well, I was born, Martha, during the middle of that flu epidemic.
Yes.
And my mother would say that in the hospital I was born in, a nurse would pick me up one day, bring me to my mother, and she would be dead the next.
Mm.
It's just a terrible thing.
Was it awful?
Oh, I sort of remember this too. My mother was sick with the flu, and I was a very small child. I must have been 2 years old. But I still remember this.
Year and a half, maybe.
And
Because I was-
she was in the bedroom, and the lights were all turned down, and everything was very, very quiet.
Yeah.
I had to be very quiet and shouldn't go in and bother her at all, you know.
A year and a half.
Yeah, I still remember that though.
Really, truly.
Well, you know, they had, we were
That was
quarantined
19
in
what
it.
was
I
it,
mean, we
19
couldn't get out.
1919.
1918, 1919, something like that.
Yeah.
So you were quarantined in the hospital?
I was
Within,
well, I was in the hospital for the training. I finished that. And then I thought, well, I don't care if the war's over. I have this friend, I'll go overseas. And lots of pickup work to be done over there. And it was very unpleasant. But I wanted to go anyway. But in the meanwhile, I was sent to Wilbur Wright, and they locked us up. I mean, we were quarantined. I know Father and Mother used to come and peer through the
Right field currently?
right field,
Yeah.
yes. And these boys were just dying like flies, and they
The flu.
gave them nothing but aspirin and
Yeah.
soda bicarb.
So what
Well,
else
what
did
else
they
did
have?
they
They didn't
have?
have, you know.
there wasn't
Martha,
anything else. There
wasn't
may not be
anything else.
anything else.
Nothing else.
Well, what else do we have now?
Well, I don't
Well,
know. We had
yeah,
Robert.
but the
I
deaths
had
from flu,
I-
Mary, were not from the virus, they were from secondary infections.
Hmm.
And that was the thing that killed people. They had pneumonias. And these are the things that penicillin, some of these other drugs would have killed.
Nowadays, well,
Yeah, sure.
Well,
Oh,
and
dear.
it was also, they didn't have, they were understaffed. And when Father
Yes.
came one time, I said, I want you to get me some, I think, sleeping pills. Nothing was, you could get anything over the counter in those days. And one other thing, and he bought it, I slipped it in, and then cough medicine.
you know,
This boy was coughing his lungs out.
you know.
So I stepped up quietly beside him and gave him a glass of water and took it. That's the last I heard of that. But,
But you did have nurses training then in Washington.
well, oddly enough, I'd had some nurses training in 1916 in New York. When I
Really,
was
truly?
in school.
Oh,
Where'd you go, Martha?
and,
Finch.
and Miss
Finch
Finch
school.
is finishing
Yeah, but
school.
the nurses training, where?
The nurses, way downtown someplace.
Bellevue?
Oh, no, it was just a small class.
I'm
wouldn't-
surprised Miss Finch
it wouldn't
left you out.
qualify to the probationary training that I got in the real thing.
You really were a very gutsy lady, Martha.
That really was interesting.
Interesting indeed.
And the same girl that was in that class went overseas. She had influence. And she later married Phil Cable,
Oh, really?
much later.
Well, let's see. Where do we
Those
pick up?
French nurses were perfectly wonderful. They really were. They knew very little, but they were very good.
Well, then when you went to France, actually, you were not an ambulance driver, but you were a great help to people who needed great help.
Well,
children?
I think, yes. They always let me go alone, which was unusual. And I remember one time the damn thing went to pieces in front of this peasant's house.
About the car?
Ambulance?
And it's the kind that you reared up.
The vehicle.
It was a, I think it had a top you could fold down.
Yeah.
Of course, I couldn't do it. But it had a, well, it was just like any other car, only it was very primitive.
Yeah.
And if you had a flat tire, you fix it. And then after you fixed it, you took it home and you blew up the inner tube.
Yeah.
And you put it, another tube. It took forever to get a tire on.
Yeah. Couldn't change just the wheel, yeah.
Oh,
Change the
heavens.
tube,
the
patch the
tube,
tube,
No,
smear.
no, that
blow
wasn't-
it up.
Yeah.
It wasn't done at all.
Okay,
I
so-
wasn't much interested in politics at the time because I didn't know much about it. I was interested in the French angle.
Well, who took care of your two children, your two daughters? Or were they born then?
Oh, no.
They weren't born.
long for us now.
I'm sorry, I backed up and got
Oh, that was
mixed
late.
up in my sequence.
Well, you knew Bud during World War One.
He was back home by that time. We crossed each other
Yeah.
because he'd been over there during the service, during the war.
We have charming pictures of you and Bud.
And he was out near, he was out near,
What was Bud doing in the First World War?
well, he was in the artillery, and I don't know exactly what his job was.
Just shooting guns off or something.
But we went back again
Yeah.
to Lyon to look the place over. It hasn't changed a bit.
Well, sometime when the tape recorder isn't on, we'll tell you our story, which is almost as remarkable as yours. But your story with Bud is a long-range
Sure.
love affair from, what, 1915 or 1918 to 1942?
It's there.
What a joy.
It was up and down.
Up and down, hither and yonder, move and remove.
What I always I said,
He said,
you saved the best for the last.
you're right. Absolutely
Right.
right. We feel so too.
It's been very, very, very good to me.
Well, tell her our story, man.
Well, so I'll tell a tape recorder off.
In Columbus, at Bud was stationed there. So I was
It's World War II.
World War
Two.
yeah,
You were in Columbus?
Columbus, yeah.
Where?
Bud was stationed.
Which hospital?
Well, I was there just about a year before the armistice. I mean,
Oh.
when would that be? 41?
No, the armistice
No.
was 45.
45.
Yeah,
So that'd be about 44.
45.
Because we were married shortly after that.
We were married about
42.
1942. So maybe you were nursing in 43 to 44, and then armistice was not long after that. At any rate, you were nursing in Columbus.
And Bud was at the head of the depot there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I enjoyed that job. I love those Catholic nurses. And I forgot what I started to say. What were we talking about before?
Talk about your job in Columbus.
In nursing, and we were trying to figure out.
Oh, about it's very, and she was talking about people being married and divorced and so forth. And I said, I've been married 3 times, and I have never been divorced. She said, that's not possible.
Well,
She probably thought I shot them all.
well, did Cable die then of natural causes? We never did figure out what happened to him.
No.
What happened to Cable?
Well, I think I told you this the other day.
No, you told us about
No.
Veely.
We know about Veely.
Oh, no, he was a sick man. He had
Yeah.
started by having syphilis.
No.
Not when, just before we were married. And in those days, solid sand was not discovered.
Uh-huh.
And he was at Harvard College. So this thing began eating him up and worked on him, and nobody knew what was his trouble
They
was.
didn't know what it was.
And I knew the last year or so that we were married that he wasn't well, and that, of course, he didn't want to do anything anyway.
Uh-huh.
So he died in St. Louis.
Really?
No, this is cable.
Cable?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, just
So, my goodness.
Nearly died of a heart attack, dude.
Well, if you
Well,
died with a
that was
drug
all the
overdose
same.
and alcohol,
picture.
and
Well, that was the mix of booze and a sedative you were
Mhm.
telling us about.
Demerol or something like
Well,
that.
that was my first husband.
Yeah, you were saying probably liquor and a sedative.
Oh, I don't think any doubt
Yeah,
about
yeah.
that. I have no
I think
clue.
your
retrospect.
reconstruction of that's probably absolutely right.
I
Mark.
agree with you.
Because, as I say, 3 of my friends died exactly the same way
Yeah.
within 6 months.
And they found out what it was.
And none of them found out what it was.
That's right.
Well, Cable was a State Department man?
No, he was a playboy. And
A what?
very
A
spoiled.
playboy.
A playboy?
Yes, and very spoiled. His mother didn't enjoy him.
Well, how the hell did you meet him?
What?
How the hell did you meet him? Where,
In
how did
Rockford,
you meet him?
Illinois.
How did you get
Jovial?
with Cable? Yeah.
Oh, because you see, he lived in Rock Island, and we lived in Moline, and I met him someplace, and then invited him for dinner. And then he stayed on, and we would go one place to another. And one thing led to another. Moline was becoming so unpleasant to me that I said, as I said,
Why was it so unpleasant, Martha?
well, my mother-in-law to start with. I mean, she wanted to run everything, no matter what it was, what kind of shoes the children wore.
Oh, good.
I'd go down, I went to Miami for a couple of months and took the children and the nurse. And she followed me down to the apartment next to me. Is that sort of thing?
Well, it wasn't just the town itself.
What?
It was not just the town of Moline.
No,
Yeah.
it wasn't. It was just the idea of getting away.
Yeah.
I'd like to have gone back to Springfield and stay live with the family, but at their age, two little children, that would have been.
An aside, some years ago, we were flying, I don't know where we were going, somewhere west, and the weather really got to be stinking. And we wound up in the area of Marlene,
Oh,
and we were having a very hard time making radio contact. And so we were flying for low frequency ranges. I had Mary on the right seat, and she's tuning in the radio range. And I'll tell you, this gal did a really great job on this, because she got us into an airport that I don't think I would have made otherwise. It was very minimum weather, but she got all the radio going.
the National Convention, they had a vote at that time, and she said to me, you know, they're voting on this. I said, and I am voting for you, which I did.
Uh-huh.
They did really good. I felt terribly sorry for her. They got a younger girl who's very good.
Uh-huh.
But that is true of a great many Navy and Army people.
Mhm.
They're in a rut, and they know their job, and they think they can't be done.
But somebody else got the votes.
Yes.
They also counted votes and said, I'm in. Oh, Martha, you were on then state politics, and then you were a national delegate.
Yes, that was really thrilling, because it was hard to get that job. It was just a 3-day trip. But you learned so much about the other states.
You were on several national delegates, were you not? In several
No,
national
I went to
conventions?
several
Conventions?
Conventions, yes,
Sure.
state conventions. But this is the first national one.
Oh, that's exciting. I know everybody in town was proud of you. Everybody in town, that is Yellow Springs, was proud of you. Whether we were Democrats or not, we said, that's our committee woman. You know, we all did. A lot of us didn't vote for you because we were Democrats in those days. But we were kind of proud of you anyway. You made it. You made it.
Well, I remember Catherine cautioning us, telling us what to do, how to behave, and to wear very quiet clothes.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, I didn't have any quiet clothes, so I just
It was
wore
not your style.
stars and stripes and everything.
Of course.
And so the little photographer called to me, and I went up, and then I knew what he had in mind. Well, by that time, I couldn't jump 3 rows and get back to my...
I'm glad you were there. Everyone.